There was a place in London where fire glowed not gold, but green. A place where a simple match could kill a person more slowly than any disease. Here, in the heart of the Victorian match factories, girls worked, some of them as young as 12. They came here thinking they would simply pack matches, but in reality, they were working in poison. The phosphorus they touched every day glowed in the dark and glowed in their bodies. At night, when they walked home, others said they could see a faint green glow around their jaws, and they had no idea what it meant. This was no legend. This was reality, in which every match carried a small particle of death. And these girls, the Matchgirls, were the first victims of the Industrial Revolution, whose faces, literally, were destroyed by fire. Today, we will go inside these factories, into rooms that smelled of sulfur, into boxes where phosphorus was dried, into the lives of girls that history has almost forgotten. Soft pause. Match burns down. This is their story, and it is brighter than any fire. Before we go down inside the factory, let me imagine this morning. London at the end of the 19th century is a city that has not yet learned to wake up without smoke. The fog hanging over the rooftops hides the outlines of the buildings, as if someone had deliberately blurred the lines between day and night. The streets smell of coal, wet stone, and something else. Sharp, almost metallic. This smell leads us towards Bromley by Bow, the place where the factory lived, which everyone knew. The girls who would soon be called Matchgirls worked here. But at the time, they themselves did not know that they were becoming part of history. They were simply going to work. The match factory rises from the fog like a huge dark box with narrow windows through which fiery light breaks through. It does not warm. It does not delight. It warns. Inside, noise. Measured, mechanical, endless. It resembles the beating of a heart that has long been deprived of oxygen. Wooden tables covered with a thin layer of white dust. This dust is not like soot or flour. It is phosphorus, a substance that glows in the dark and eats away at bones. Standing next to the long tables are the girls. Some of them are 14, others are 12, sometimes 10. Their fingers quickly, almost mechanically, mix glue, phosphorus powder, and small wooden sticks from which a match is born. On each face is the same patience that appears in those who grow up early. The air in the workshop is heavy, not just warm, heavy. It settles on the tongue with bitterness, leaves yellowish stains on clothes that cannot be washed off. Here, even the shadows seem to move more slowly. A girl, perhaps about 13, sits at one of the tables. Her hair is pulled back into a coarse bun. Her cheeks are smeared with phosphorus dust that glitters in the lamplight like tiny crystals. When she turns, it seems for a moment that her skin is also glowing. To others, this seems like a peculiarity of the lighting, but she doesn't anymore. She is known for a long time. If you smile in front of a mirror in the dark at night, your teeth will glow with a greenish light, and no one at the factory will tell her that this is the first sign of a disease that is slowly eating away at your jaw. Today's shift has just begun, and the girls are already coughing slightly. You can't see the phosphorus dust, but it settles in your lungs. Each of them knows this cough, and each of them pretends that it is temporary. A supervisor stands above them. He walks between the tables like a shadow. He is not interested in the condition of the workers, only in the number of matches they will make by the evening. Mistakes are punished by a fine. Lateness is punished by a fine. Questions are punished by a fine. Time does not move forward in this place. It simply falls down like match dust. And while we stand next to these girls, peering into their faces, listening to the soft rustle of the wooden boxes from which matches are poured, we already understand the main thing. They did not know that they were working in a factory that would later be called the Factory of Deadly Glow. Now it seems to them that this is just a job, just a way to make money, just an ordinary day. But we know more. We know that this day is only the first step towards a tragedy that will take away their smiles, their voices, and for many, their lives. Soft pause. The industrial hum grows faint. This was just the beginning. In Bow, where the factory stood, the children were accustomed to rising before the sun. On cold mornings, their bare feet touched the stone floor of the house, where the bed was 1 in 3, and bread was a luxury. They did not think about school or morning games. They thought about arriving in time before the overseer was still standing at the door. Most of the workers here are children, and the simplest, the weakest, most often found themselves where the poison was closest to the skin. The first hour of the shift can be called quiet, not because the shop is really quiet. On the contrary, there is always a rumble, a rustle, a stomp. But quiet because the children have not yet had time to get tired. Their fingers move quickly. I take a stick, dip it in the mixture, shake it, put it on the grate. And so on hundreds of times, thousands. They were taught to do it correctly, but they were not taught how not to get poisoned. No one warned them that phosphorus is not just a white powder, that it not only glows in the dark, but also crawls under nails, settles in cracks in the skin, penetrates into small cuts, dozens of which occur in a day. Little Linny, one of them is 11 years old, works in the mixing section today. That means her hands will be in the solution all day long, in a warm, sticky, smelly solution that smells sharply like burnt teeth. She dips both hands into the bowl, stirs the thick mass as if she were stirring soup. Her hands immediately take on a dull sheen, as if someone had sprinkled them with fine mica. The phosphorus dust sticks to the skin, seeps into the folds of her palms. Linny tries not to touch her face, but sometimes she can't. Her hair falls into her eyes. And then there's a fine white dust in the corners of her lips. It's barely noticeable, but it's the dust that will start eating away at her bones in a few months. Sarah, a little older, about 14, works next to her. Sarah already knows what to do to avoid attracting the supervisor's attention. She moves very quickly, almost automatically. Her hands, down, smear, lift, spread. Her fingers are already somewhat crooked, her nails broken and paper thin. She notices Linny touching her lips. Sarah nudges her lightly with her shoulder. "Don't touch your mouth." "Why?" "Then your teeth will hurt so much that you won't be able to sleep." Linny hesitates, but nods. Her teeth already hurt from time to time. At night, the pain throbs as if someone were tapping an empty glass with a spoon somewhere under the jaw. But that's just the beginning. After 2 hours, the dust in the air becomes part of the body. It settles on the eyelashes, on the eyebrows, on the shoulders. When the children wipe their foreheads, a white streak remains on the palms of their hands, like chalk. And what's most amazing, this dust can glow in the dark. Some of the factory workers said that when they come home in the winter, when the streets are dark and quiet, their jaws reflect a faint green glow, as if their faces were little flashlights, as if something inside was glowing with fire from under their skin. At first, the girls laughed. It seemed funny. "Look, my teeth are shining," they would say to each other. And indeed, sometimes their smiles turned green. But the laughter disappeared when the smell appeared. A special smell that is difficult to forget. The smell of rotting bone. Sarah sometimes has it. Subtle, but sharp. She thinks it is just from work, that it will soon pass. But we already know, this smell is the first step towards a disease called phossy jaw. A disease that will one day make Sarah unable to open her mouth. And for now, the day continues. The sun rises over London, but in the factory it is almost imperceptible. There is no light here. There is only fog, the heat of the drying ovens, and endless phosphorus dust. Here children grow up not by years, but by breaths, and each breath is a step forward into the darkness from which they will not be able to return as they were. The light that devours jaws. In Victorian London, people believed that evil came at night. But the Matchgirls' evil didn't come from the darkness. It came from inside their own bodies, slowly, imperceptibly, persistently. And it all started small. First, a mild toothache, the kind a child can tolerate, the kind she's ashamed to mention at home, lest she lose her job. Because the hospital means one thing, a fine. And a fine means hunger. The first week. The pain comes from time to time. Some blame the cold water. Some blame the poor diet. But the real reason lies in the white powder they inhale every day. The second week. The girls begin to avoid solid food. The bread is sharp as a rock. Her lips are chapped from the sour taste in her mouth. The smell is still faint. Week 3. At night, the pain starts waking them up before they do, and it goes on for hours. Linny, the same 11-year-old girl from the previous chapter, sleeps with her cheek pressed against a sock filled with warm ashes, an old method they learned from their grandmothers. But it doesn't help. In the morning, she wakes up with the feeling that someone has touched her jaw with a hot iron. And when she smiles at Sarah, trying not to look upset, a very faint, almost imperceptible green glow appears on her lips. Sarah sees it immediately. She's been through it herself. "Don't smile too much," she says quietly. "Why?" "People will understand." At this point, Linny doesn't understand what Sarah means, but we do. In the dark, their jaws glowed not because they were special, but because the phosphorus had already penetrated the fabric. Phosphorus is a chemical fire. It doesn't burn like a candle flame. It burns slowly, like coal. And when it gets under the skin, it lights the way to its own destruction. A smell you won't forget. In the factory, this smell comes first. Not in the drying rooms, not in the packing section, but where the children stand. The smell of rotting bones. First, the supervisors blame hygiene. "You don't wash your hands," they say, and you get a fine. Then they blame bad teeth, and you get a fine. And then they start blaming the workers themselves. "It's your fault you're sick." The girls' jaws start to swell, but not like a normal infection. The swelling is worse here. Dark red, a green spot at the bottom that's almost luminescent. Sarah is the first to smell it. It's a smell, sweet, sharp, almost chemical. It makes her shiver. She tries to cover her mouth with a handkerchief, but it doesn't help. The supervisors pretend not to hear anything. All they care about is the number of boxes produced. The disease doesn't fit into the statistics. A tooth that won't stay in your mouth. One morning, Lenny comes to work and feels something metallic in her mouth, like a piece of rust. She swallows, but the taste doesn't go away. A few hours later, as she picks up another batch of matches, a sharp pain pierces her cheek. She steps aside, turns away so no one notices, and quietly takes out of her mouth a tooth. It didn't fall out, it crumbled. It became soft like wet limestone, yellowish at the tip. Lenny looks at him in confusion, then at Sarah. Sarah just shakes her head. "You're not the first." "What should I do?" "Work. What else?" "Because if I go to the doctor, it means a fine and dismissal. And dismissal means someone in the family won't eat." Neighbors tell stories. In many parts of London, rumors spread about working girls whose faces glowed in the dark. "It's a myth," said others. But those who saw it with their own eyes assured us, when girls passed by gas lamps, the edge of their jaws would flash a strange light. Some would scare children with the words, "Don't go near these girls, they're poisoned." No one knew how true it was. The fire starts inside. A phrase spread among the girls. Matches make us brighter. But the light they saw on themselves was not in vain, but a warning. The phosphorus filled the pores, got stuck in the bones, seeped into the blood. It glowed in the dark. And it seemed to them that it was just a funny effect. We know, if the body is glowing, it is already burning. Only this fire is not visible immediately, and every day it becomes stronger. The girls do not yet know that soon the pain will become unbearable, that the rot will become visible, that some of them will begin to lose not only their teeth, but also parts of their jaws. While they work, their movements are quiet and even. While they laugh, although not as loudly as before. While they look in the mirror and notice that they are glowing a little more. But this is only the beginning of a disease that has devoured them slowly, systematically, relentlessly. A disease that will make their names unforgettable. Factory rooms of death. The factory seems to be one, but inside it is divided into several rooms. Rooms, each with its own smell, its own sound, its own way of breaking down the human body. The workers called them hells, not officially, not aloud, but those words were whispered among themselves in the corridors when the supervisors were away. Today we will enter 3 of them, the ones that were not written about in the newspapers, and that no one wanted to show to visitors. The mixing room, the place where hands rot first. The mixing room is the heart of the factory. Here, each stick passes through a thick, white, viscous mass that smells like someone has burned bones. The walls are covered with a layer of yellowish coating. In places it shines, like a fresh wax candle. But it's not wax. It's phosphorus that settles over the years. The youngest people work here, those who can move their hands faster, those who aren't tired enough to make mistakes yet. Lenny is standing right here today. Her fingers are constantly in the mixture. The solution seeps into all the little wounds left by the wooden sticks. The burning is unbearable, but she says nothing. Silence is the only currency accepted without penalty in the factory. Sarah works nearby and tries to cover for her. She teaches Lenny, "Move faster." "But your fingers hurt." Everyone hurts here. In this room, hands don't just get tired, they start to rot first. The skin turns yellow. Greenish spots appear under the nails that glow in the dark. And all this from the mixture that coats hundreds of thousands of matches every day. The drying room is a place where breathing is more terrible than working. The drying room is a warm, stifling tunnel full of shelves. On them are countless rows of sticks covered with phosphorus paste. When the workers open the door, the smell hits their chests like a heavy hammer. The air here seems to be alive. It is thick, heavy, hot. It sticks to their skin. The girls who work here rarely stand straight. They are thrown into a slight dizziness by the fumes. They hold on to the shelves as if the waves of this air could sweep them off their feet. The phosphorus evaporates slowly but persistently. Every breath is a sip of poison. You almost never hear voices in the drying room, just heavy, frequent breaths, the whispered prayers of those who hope that today will not get worse. Sarah came here briefly last month. After one shift, she couldn't open her eyes for 2 days. They burned as if hot sand had been poured into them. The packing room, a place where smiles fade. At first glance, this is the quietest part of the factory. The girls sit at long tables, putting matches into boxes, wrapping them, tying them with ribbons. This is the stage that journalists were sometimes shown. But there is also a silence here, a silence that is not reassuring, but exhausting. The packers work fast. The boxes move in their hands, as if in a dance. But when you look at their faces, you see something else. Fatigue, sleepless nights, the pain they carry inside their jaws and are unable to hide. Some of the girls keep their mouths half open to relieve the pressure on their gums. Others place cold spoons against their cheeks. The supervisors look at it indifferently. They are used to the smell of rotting bone. In this room, smiles are the first to disappear. Even jokes sound different, short, without light. Corridor of Truth. There is a narrow passage between these rooms, which the workers call the Corridor of Truth. In it, they meet during breaks. Someone rubs their jaw. Someone wipes away tears. Someone simply stands, looking at the floor. It is here that there is the greatest chance of hearing the words, "My teeth hurt again." "Me too. And I don't feel anything anymore." One thing is clear here. There are no healthy people in the factory. There are only those who can still work. The green fog of London. London at the end of the 19th century is a city of smoke that breathes in itself. During the day, a light gray veil rises above the rooftops, but in the evening, the fog thickens so much that it seems as if the air has weight. The city cats move more cautiously. The torches of gas lamps tremble like the flame of a candle before death. And people walk the streets with their heads bowed, as if something is watching them. There is a place for everything in this fog, for secrets, for poverty, for smog. But in some areas there is another, a greenish glow, and it did not belong to the city. This glow was not born in basements or kitchens. It walked the streets. It went home every night. And its carriers were little girls from the factory. When the city began to see the light. One evening, Lenny walks home from her shift. Her fingers are sticky with toothpaste, her clothes smell of phosphorus, and her lips are coated with a bitter film that she wipes away with her sleeve. All around her is a thick fog that looks like a mixture of smoke and milk. She passes a gas lamp, and for a moment, it seems that the corner of her jaw flashes green. She doesn't notice it, but the man standing by the shop freezes. "Did you see that?" whispers the woman next to her. They say there's fire under their skin. The woman's voice trembles. Because no one knows what's going on. People start to avoid these girls, not out of hatred, but out of fear. At the time, no one knows that it's phosphorus that accumulates in their bones and reacts with light. At the time, they think it's something supernatural. Phosphorus children, the new rumors of London. Rumors appear in pubs and markets. They say their teeth glow when they talk in the dark. And I heard that one girl glowed even in a coffin. It's a curse. Those factories are not for people. Thus is born the urban legend of the phosphorus children, about children who carry light that should not belong to the living. All these scary stories have a grain of truth. Phosphorus can really glow in the dark due to a chemical reaction with air. But no one understood then that this was not magic, not punishment, but a symptom of a deadly disease. Only the girls themselves did not know how dangerous they were to each other. Each exhalation brought a new portion of poison into the lungs of their colleagues. Each smile was a small window into the future, which would soon take away the pain. Sarah sees the glow for the first time. One evening, when the factory turns off the lights, Sarah catches a glimpse of herself in the darkness near the window. At first, she thinks it's a reflection from a machine outside. But when she raises her hand to her face, she sees a faint greenish outline along her jaw. She doesn't scream. She doesn't panic. She just sits there silently and watches. A thought arises in her head that is stronger than fear. Something is wrong with me, and I can't hide it anymore. She remembers a girl who used to work here. Her teeth were falling out one by one. Then everyone laughed that she glows from the inside. A few weeks later, she disappeared. No one explained why. Only the smell that remained in the room after her explained everything. Fog that enhances the glow. In London at that time, smog contained sulfur, carbon, and chemical impurities from factories. This fog became a natural background for the phosphorus dust on the girls' faces. In some areas, people swore that they had seen faces in the fog that literally glowed. The fog comes in, and out of it they come. That was the saying in Bow, in the old yards where women dried laundry. And every night, Lenny, Sarah, and the other Matchgirls walked home through this fog, like little ghosts who have to live in the living world. The city begins to turn away from them. First it is the looks, then the whispers, then the fears. Mothers forbid their children to play near the factory girls. Shopkeepers refuse to accept them in line. Doctors avoid taking patients from the factories. This is not anger. This is fear of the unknown. No one knows that phosphorus is not contagious, only its consequences. The green fog is a harbinger of the great explosion. During this period, articles begin to appear in London, small, almost imperceptible, about strange cases of illness among match factory workers. So far, these are only whispers that someone dares to ridicule. But these whispers will not pass, because the fog is getting thicker, and the glow is more noticeable. And soon, someone will ask a question that will change history. Why do our children glow in the dark? Invisible killer. Daily routine. Phosphorus doesn't scream. It doesn't tear the body apart suddenly, like a blow or an injury. It works slowly, steadily, like water sharpening a stone. At Matchgirls, it settles into every day, every movement, every habit. Everything looks normal. The schedule doesn't change. The work is the same every day, the same people, the same tables, the same boxes rattling against each other. But beneath this calmness lies what the older workers call the invisible killer. A morning that begins the same way. A Matchgirls' day begins long before work. Waking up, in the dark, in the damp early morning cold. One of the girls rubs her jaw with a warm towel, trying to ease the pain. Others put a piece of dry bread in their mouths, even though each bite is a small disaster. The pain that was once a weak one is now a persistent companion. Many of the girls already have dark circles under their eyes, constant fatigue, a slight unsteadiness when they walk. But they go anyway, because the factory punishes not only for absence, sometimes for too long a pause between shifts. The ritual of silence. In the factory, before work begins, there is an invisible ritual. The girls roll up their sleeves, prepare bowls, tools, distribute boxes, and look at each other, as if checking whether each is ready to live another day. No one says anything unnecessary. Silence is not a convenience. Silence is a way of survival. Because when you start talking about the pain, it becomes more. Sarah looks at Linny, who is trying to hide the pain on the left side of her jaw. Linny smiles, but her smile is short, asymmetrical, strained. Sarah nods. They have been communicating without words for a long time. The workshop lives by its own rules. Every day the girls go through the same stages, mixing the paste. Hands in a warm, thick phosphoric mass. Skin changes color. The smell is sharp, viscous. Dipping the sticks. The movements are repeated hundreds of times. Each movement is an inhalation of dust. Drying shelves. The air here is thick, hot, deceptive, like smoke from a fire that has long since died out. Packaging. Outside, peace. Inside, microscopic particles of poison settling in the lungs. All this at a pace that does not allow you to stop. Fear here takes the form of a fine, an accusation, a dismissal. Phosphorus acts as if it were alive. It sticks to your hair. It settles on your eyelashes. It mixes with your sweat. It gets under your nails. There is science to explain it, but the workers only see the consequences. Dark spots on their gums. An unpleasant smell that doesn't go away after washing. Sore eyes. Sleepless nights. Some start to think that there is something wrong with them, and the girls are afraid not of the factory, but of their own bodies. Breaks that don't heal. A break here is not a time for rest. It's a small window through which they try to get a breath of fresh air. But the air from the dark London fog is no longer saving anything. Linny goes outside and presses her hand to her cheek. She thinks it's just a tooth. Just another day. Sarah follows her. She sees Linny trembling. Sarah sits down next to her, and there is a moment of silence. Then Linny says, "It will pass, won't it?" Sarah doesn't answer, because she knows better. She has seen what happens next. She has seen phosphorus show no mercy. The daily horror has no great climax, only small losses. Matchgirls don't die suddenly. They are not taken by an explosion or a fall. They are taken by the process. Every day is a small bite of poison. Every day is a new symptom. How many teeth fall out in a year? How many nights do they cry in pain? How many workers stand there, clenching their jaws so they don't show how much pain they are in. All of this is part of the everyday. The invisible killer here doesn't wear a face. He wears a smell. He wears a fog. It lives in the air, and every day they breathe it in. The chapter ends with a growing sense of foreboding. At this point, the girls are already starting to get wary. Something new is in the air at the factory. Not just toxic dust, but questions. Questions no one dares to ask. Why are we all getting sick? How many more? Who's next? Phosphorus hasn't shown his true colors yet, but soon he will, and then their lives will change forever. When pain becomes a part of life. There is pain that comes on suddenly, from a blow, a fall, a cut. And there is pain that comes on slowly. So slowly that one day you wake up and can't remember when it started. In Matchgirls, this second pain becomes an invisible law of the factory, a law that has no exceptions, an awakening that no longer feels like a dream. Sarah wakes up before dawn, not from the noise, not from the cold, from the pain. It usually lives somewhere under her teeth, but today it's deeper, as if someone is squeezing her jaw from the inside. She rolls over on one side, then on the other, bites the blanket so as not to wake her little sister. By morning, the pain subsides, but only because she's more tired. Linny also spends the night without sleep. She sits by a small window, holding a warm towel to her cheek. The light from the lantern falls on her face at such an angle that for a moment it seems something is flickering green under the skin. The girl touches her cheek with her fingertips. She doesn't know what to do. And the worst thing is that no one in the world knows how to treat it. A day that begins with illness. When the girls come to the factory, they don't hurry like they used to. There is something delayed in each of their movements, a slight pause, uncertainty, caution. Sarah walks more slowly. Linny often puts her fingers to her jaw. The other girls also hold their faces or the back of their throats. A new sound appears in the air. Not the clanking of boxes, not the rustling of chopsticks, but the low, cautious wheezing of someone trying to swallow painful saliva. Phosphorus shows its true face. The disease begins with small things: pressure in the jaw, slight swelling, a feeling as if the teeth are not there, a faint smell of rot. But now, these small things are starting to manifest themselves simultaneously. Lynn's temperature has already risen. Her neck is hot, but her cheeks are cold. Sarah notices that a small, dark spot has appeared under Lynn's ear, like a bruise, but harder. Sarah approaches her during a break. "Can you show me?" Lynn is embarrassed, but still pushes her hair back. Sarah inhales sharply. The smell is familiar. It's a smell they're all afraid to smell at least once. The smell that means phosphorus is already inside the bone. When pain becomes the norm. No one at the factory takes the disease seriously. The guards are used to the smell. They are used to the blood on the handkerchiefs. They are used to the fact that the girls sometimes faint. The only thing that interests the management is, did they manage to do the norm? Did they take too much time for breaks? Do they complain out loud? Everything else is their personal problems. And so the girls learn to live as if pain is just part of their duties. They work, clenching their jaws so as not to groan. They joke, although in every laugh you can hear a slight hiss of pain. They swallow food in small pieces so as not to touch the dead zones in their mouths. The pain does not go away. It adapts. It becomes the background, like the clatter of machines in a workshop. The first disappeared. One day, a girl named Mary doesn't come to work. She's always been quiet, diligent. No one knows what happened to her. The next week, another one doesn't come, Elizabeth. Sometimes someone says they saw a funeral with a small coffin. Sometimes that the girl just disappeared. The factory doesn't ask. The other workers stop asking either, because in this place, absence is just part of the mechanism. Sarah begins to fear the nights. During the day, you can distract yourself with movement. Work takes your mind away. But at night, when the silence intensifies, phosphorus speaks louder. Sarah lies in the dark. She touches her jaw, and with each touch, she feels a hard, hot throb, as if something is growing under her skin. It's not the pain that scares her. What scares her is the thought that she knows how it all ends. And Lenny also begins to fear sleep. Every time she closes her eyes, she sees a green spot in the reflection of the window. The final note of the chapter. There comes a moment when the worker can no longer say that she is healthy. And at the same time, she cannot admit that she is sick. The state between these two words is factory routine. This is a state in which you can still work, but you can no longer live as before. In Matchgirls, pain is not an exception. It is part of the work itself. And this thought, imperceptibly planted in the girls' heads, changes them forever. Because when pain becomes the norm, then illness is already too close. Stories of the lost. Every factory has its own sound. Every street has its own smell. And the Matchgirls factory had its own, almost imperceptible but recognizable. A mixture of phosphorus, children's sweat, and silence. Silence came when no one else came. The factory never announced the name of the one who disappeared. It did not stop the machines. It did not pause. It simply continued to work. But the girls remembered. Their memory was stronger than the management. Today, we will walk the path of these little stories. Stories that are not written in books, but live in the whispers of the corridors. Mary Heineman, the girl who said too little. Mary was one of the smallest, thin, with dark hair that always fell over her forehead. She was one of those children who never bothered. She worked quietly, quickly, as if she was afraid of being seen. Mary did not complain, not even when her jaw began to hurt so much that she could not close her teeth. The neighbors saw her every morning putting a polished copper spoon to her face, cold, to dull the pain for a moment. She smiled when they asked her if she was okay. Just a cold. But everyone knew it was not a cold. One day, Mary did not come. The next day either. On the third day, another girl took her place at the table. Only one neighbor later whispered, "She died quietly," so quietly that no one noticed. The phosphorus did its thing, and the factory moved on. Elizabeth Gordon, the girl who laughed the longest. Elizabeth was the opposite of Mary. She was not silent. She laughed loudly, even joked with the guards, quietly but boldly. They said that she had the most pleasant voice in all of Bow, and that is why her disappearance hurt especially much. It all started with the fact that she lost a tooth, just during a shift. She laughed. "Oh, now I will whistle better than a kettle." But the following days her eyes did not laugh anymore, because the smell became stronger, the swelling greater, sleep shorter. One evening, returning home, Elizabeth fainted right on the bridge. When they picked her up, She could no longer open her mouth completely. The doctor looked at her and only sighed. Because medicine knew one thing back then: once it starts, it can't be stopped. She was buried quickly, without further ado, and the factory never spoke her name again. But the girls in the packing rooms kept saying for a long time, "Now it's quiet here, because those who laugh go first." Little Ada is a shadow that remains in all hearts. Ada was 9. That's too young for the factory. But in those years, children were only asked for one thing: to have at least some hands. And Ada had hands. Thin, but fast. Ada loved counting boxes. For her, it was a game. Who could add up the most in a shift? She was fast, almost unbelievably fast, and the factory loved it, because speed was more precious here than life. When Ada started coughing, everyone thought she had a cold. When it hurt to chew, it was a tooth. When her jaw swelled, it was inflammation. But when Ada began to have difficulty breathing, the girls knew. Phosphorus had taken its least victim. She died in the night, without screams, without light. She simply stopped breathing. The factory announced nothing. Simply, one day, there were fewer boxes, just as many as Ada had been packing, and no one was surprised by it. A silence that prevents us from forgetting. After each loss, the factory behaved as if nothing had happened, as if one pair of little hands made no difference, as if the workers were just parts of a mechanism that could be replaced. But another process was unfolding among the girls, one that the supervisors could not see. The girls began to remember. They retold stories. They passed on names. They whispered about symptoms. They watched each other's jaws. They compared pain. Understanding began to live in the factory. Very quiet, almost invisible. Understanding that their lives mattered, that what was happening to them was not normal, that the death of a child was not a trivial matter of production. The silence was filled with meaning, just as the fog of London was filled with a green glow. When fear turns into questions. After the stories of Mary, Elizabeth, and Ada, something new appears among the workers. Not just fear, but questions. Why do we get sick? Why only us? And why is the factory silent? These questions are quiet at first, but they grow, and they will become the spark for a rebellion that will change the history of England. But that will be later. For now, there is only memory in silence. A silence that sounds louder than any machine. The silence before the uprising. There are two kinds of silence in the world. One is when the night is so deep that it seems as if time has fallen asleep. The other is when people stop talking, not because they have nothing to say, but because it is dangerous to say it out loud. Silence became the second air in Bryant and May's factory. The girls did not talk about their illnesses. They did not talk about the smell of rotting bone. They did not talk about the fact that Mary, Elizabeth, and Ada would never return. But it was in this silence that thoughts began to emerge that would later change history. Something changes in their outlook. Linny arrives at work later than usual. There is a dark spot on her jaw, no longer hidden by her hair. Sarah sees her and feels something cold clench inside her. They do not talk about pain. They do not talk about fear. But now they look at each other longer. These long looks are the first signs that the silence is beginning to take shape. The thought that sprouts in each one: we can't live like this. Fear no longer scares, it tires. The girls are used to being afraid of fines, of the supervisor's shouts, of being fired, of a toothache, of the smell that betrays the onset of illness. But fear that lasts every day, for months, for years, does not remain fear. It turns into fatigue. And fatigue is the tyrant's greatest enemy, because a tired person no longer seeks permission. He seeks a way out. Whispers in the corridors. A new sound appears in the factory corridors. Not a groan, not a cough, not footsteps, but a whisper. At first he is quiet, uncertain. Two girls talk about their wages being cut by another penny. Others about the overseer saying, "If you don't like it, we'll find someone else." 2, 3, 5 girls lean their heads closer together. It's unfair. They're making fun of us. Nobody's listening. But there are a lot of us. These are not complaints. These are an awakening. The newspaper that will change everything. In July 1888, the factory first heard a word it didn't like: journalist. A woman with a notebook appeared in the area, Annie Besant. The young workers began to tell her about fines, poisoning, and being forced to work even with open wounds. At first, it was those who were no longer afraid of losing their jobs, those who had lost their health, those who knew that the disease was inevitable. But when those who were still on their feet heard it, something cracked in the silence. Linny sees Sarah reading the article, "White Slavery in London." Sarah's eyes slowly lift from the newspaper, and she understands. For the first time, someone has called their suffering by its true name. She whispered, "We are not just workers. We are victims." And for the first time, these words did not frighten her. On the contrary, they gave her strength. Management begins to get nervous. When the article went to print, the manufacturers pretended that nothing had happened. A lie. An exaggeration. There is nothing dangerous in phosphorus. But they knew that was not true. The factory had never been afraid of sick girls. The factory was afraid of famous girls. Because the story, broadcast to all of London, could create something more terrible than phosphorus: public opinion. And so the management began to act. Intimidation, threats, the dismissal of the leaders. But they made a mistake. The more they pressed, the more the girls understood. We are dangerous to them. Linny takes a step that will change everything. One evening, as the factory is preparing to close, Linny approaches Sarah. Her voice is quiet, but not weak. "Sarah, I am no longer afraid." And then, in the dark corridor between the drying rooms, the two girls say aloud for the first time what has been pulsing in the hearts of hundreds for months. Something must be done. We must say no. No one heard it. No one saw it. But that was the moment when the match was lit, a small spark of human dignity in a room where everything else glowed with poison. Silence no longer belonged to the factory. It had become the girls' tool. There is always a strange calm before an uprising, a calm in which something great feels, something inevitable. In the Matchgirls, that calm looked like this. The gazes were longer, the whispers were deeper, the silences were heavier, the fear was less. And though each of the girls still held matches in her hand, they already held a flame in their hearts, a flame that would soon change England. Matchgirls strike. There are moments in the world when ordinary people make extraordinary choices. Moments when fear no longer holds them in chains. And then a story begins, not for books, but for hearts. In July 1888, such a moment came in the quiet rooms of the Bryant and May match factory. The spark that lit the fire. After Annie Besant's article, the factory management decided to punish those who had said too much to the journalist. A list of undesirable workers appeared almost instantly. Among them was one girl who worked next to Sarah. Her name was Mary Callahan. She told the truth, and for that she was expelled. When the girls found out about this, there was a pause in the air. Not a scream, not a storm. A pause. A silence that went from heart to heart. Linny, her jaw already swollen, clenched her fists. Sarah looked at Mary's empty seat at the table and felt her breathing slow, heavy. Then someone said, quietly, almost inaudibly, "It's not fair." And those words were the first breath of revolution. A decision made without a vote. There were no meetings in the factory. There were no speeches. There were no leaders. There was a group of emaciated, sick, malnourished girls, and a truth that had become heavier than their fear. When the supervisors entered the shop, the girls' eyes were no longer downcast. They met her gaze, for the first time. Among them stood Sarah. She didn't look like a leader. She didn't know how to raise her voice. But she had pain, a pain that knew the way to truth. She took a short step forward. "We are not working." It was said quietly but firmly. The supervisor did not immediately understand the meaning. But a second later, the girls began to stand. Rise. Move away from the tables. The factory froze. The white phosphorus was silent. Match dust settled on the floor. And for the first time in decades, the machines were moving not in time with the girls, but against them, a step beyond the threshold. The Matchgirls came out into the street, one after another. Not like a crowd, like a river. Some held their jaws with their hands. Some coughed. Some walked as if each step was taken with a fight. But they walked. When the factory doors closed behind them, it was like the sound of a changing era, as if a huge book had closed and a new one had begun. Linny came out after them. The fog around her glowed green, a faint, unsettling glow. And for the first time, Linny didn't look away. Sarah took her hand. "We're together, Linny. What now?" Now, fighting. The March to Annie Besant. The girls walked through London, slowly but surely. As they walked through the streets, they attracted everyone's attention. People, horses, shopkeepers, even the police. Not because they were loud, but because they were grand in their silence. The buildings above them seemed to bow their heads. The city looked at them as a witness looks at something historical. Not understanding, but feeling. When they reached Annie Besant's office, the door opened before anyone knocked. The journalist came out to them, and a mixture of pain and pride flashed across her face. "You have come. We cannot be silent," said Sarah. "And you will not be," said Besant. "Now you are the voice of England, the power of many silent voices." The strike was not loud, not bloody, not heroic in the traditional sense. It was stubborn, unyielding, silent. Most of the girls never held up placards. They did not shout slogans. They simply stood. They stood in front of the factory, They stood in front of the journalists. They stood in front of the authorities. They stood in front of the world. Their silence screamed louder than any words. The London newspapers wrote about them every day. The girls' photographs appeared on the front pages. People brought them food, warm clothes, even new shoes, for many had holes in the soles. For the first time in history, England saw, not employers, not a factory, but children. Sick, poisoned, small, but unconquered. The factory management is in a corner. Bryant and May were sure that the strike would fail. After all, these girls are poor, sick, weak. Who will support them? But they were wrong. The strike was joined by newspapers, trade unions, political activists, teachers, students, whole communities of London. The strength was not in health, not in money, not in power. The strength was in the truth, and the truth was finally heard. The final moment, a victory that no one expected. In mid-July, the factory surrendered, officially, publicly. It was announced. Abolition of unfair fines, improved working conditions, raised wages, end of abusive management practices. It was a victory, big, bloodless, profound, and it began with one word: no. Sarah stood in the crowd, holding Linny by the shoulder. Her jaw still ached. She didn't know what would happen to her health next, but she knew something else. They could no longer be silenced. The day the factory was feared. There is a day in the life of every great house when the walls seem to listen to the silence, when the windows seem darker, when even the doors open reluctantly. For Bryant and May's factory, such a day came a week after the strike, and though the building looked as solid as ever on the outside, something new was felt inside, almost invisible but inescapable. The factory was afraid. A silence that turned the other way. Usually the silence of the factory was oppressive, cold. It was the silence of authority, a silence that commanded to work faster, not to ask questions, not to look up. But today the silence was different. Now it belonged to the girls. They stood in front of the building, dozens, hundreds, and looked at the factory as one might look at a beast that could no longer bite. It was a silence of confidence, a silence that said, "Now we are not alone." Management in a panic that cannot be hidden. In the factory offices, other sounds reigned. Rapid steps, loud whispers, nervous blows of the pen, arguments behind closed doors. The bosses, who for years had ignored the workers, now argued. "We will lose our reputation. The newspapers will destroy us. We cannot allow them to stand there every day. Something must be done." And no one spoke of the girls as people. They spoke of a threat to their power. A morning that did not begin as usual. That day there was no factory jingle. There were no commands from the supervisors. The machines did not start. The girls watched and waited. And though many had sore jaws, trembling hands, and feet throbbing from hours of standing, no one moved. And then the manager came out of the door, white-haired, red-faced, but he looked different today, smaller. He looked around the crowd and away. The authorities can never look those they have wronged in the eye for long. Sarah takes a step forward. As the manager began to speak in a dry, drawn-out voice, the words came to the girls with a delay. "We're ready to discuss some changes." Sarah felt a wave of tension run through the crowd. Linny squeezed her fingers. Sarah took a step. A small one, barely noticeable, but it was enough. Because her voice, quiet, weary, but determined, rang louder than any shout. "We will not return without guarantees." It was not an ultimatum. It was the truth. And the factory shuddered. The fear that walks the corridors. Inside, in the dark, narrow corridors of the factory, the worker inspectors walked anxiously. They knew there were too many girls, too much press attention. The public support was unprecedented. They knew that this was not just a strike. This was a turning point. Every supervisor who had yelled at the children for years now avoided looking at the workers, even from the second-floor windows. The factory that had so confidently ruled over Beau was, for the first time, afraid of its own walls. First concessions. By the end of the day, management had announced a review of the penalty system, a review of working conditions, a limitation on shift lengths. But that wasn't enough. The girls knew that the factory only wanted to appear sympathetic to the newspapers. Sarah said quietly but firmly, "We are waiting for real changes." And the crowd repeated, "Real ones." That word became a hammer, and the factory heard every blow. When the factory's fear turns into respect. The next morning, management announced a new decision, a wage increase, the creation of a working conditions committee, an end to illegal fines, a commitment not to punish workers for speaking to the press again. This was a turning point, not because the factory suddenly became good, but because it understood these girls could break its silence. And that became a new reality. Sarah looks at the factory one last time that day. When the decision was announced, the girls didn't celebrate. They didn't shout. They didn't dance. They just stood. They stood for a long time. They were silent. They looked at the factory, the place that had taken so much health, so many friends, so much childhood. And in that silence, there was something new. Not fear, not hatred. Dignity. What the factory had been trying to take away for years. The final accent of the chapter. At dawn, as the girls were going home, Sarah looked around. The factory stood huge, gloomy, dark. But for the first time it looked old, as if its strength had gone with that day. Because the factory understood, 9-year-old girls covered in phosphorus had turned out to be stronger than the empire. What left after dawn? Every story has a beginning. Every struggle has a reason. Every darkness has an end. But the most important thing always remains after. In the silent emptiness, when the screams have died down, when the hands no longer hold the banners, when the crowd disperses and the city returns to its usual noise. It is in this silence that memory is born. And the memory of the Matchgirls was not a brief flash of protest, but a glow that never went out. After the victory, not joy, but a great silence. The strike of 1888 was officially over. The newspapers called it a miracle. The politicians, an impossible success. London, an event that will be talked about for a long time. But the girls, returning to work, felt not a victorious triumph, but silence. There was no fanfare. There were no celebrations, no medals. There was only the realization, we survived where they left us no place to live. Sarah walked through the factory yard on the first day after the strike and felt how strangely the space had changed. The same walls, the same smell of phosphorus, the same great brick shadow over the bow area. But now, she was walking not into the darkness, but toward her truth. Linny's jaw, a silent wound that would not heal. Linny returned to work too, but her jaw hardly moved anymore. The pain haunted her constantly, night, day, even in moments of silence. The factory changed the rules, but it could not restore health to those who had already been touched by phosphorus. Linny sat at her desk and smiled only with her eyes. She didn't need words to tell Sarah, "We did everything we could." She didn't expect to live long, but she did expect justice, at least for those who would come after her. And that was what gave meaning to every day she lived. The factories returned to sound. The machines were working again. The floors were shaking. The air was once again pulsating with the warmth of glue and phosphorus. But now the sound of the factory was different. It didn't squeeze your chest. It didn't scare you. It didn't press on your consciousness. Because now something new lived in that sound. The right to say no. And that right changed everything. Girls become women and carry their fire on. Months passed. Many girls left the factory. Some found other jobs. Some went to other cities. Some started families. But none of them forgot that summer of 1888, because it was the summer they learned that their voices matter, that their pain is not invisible, that their friendship is stronger than fear, that even the poorest have the power to change the world. Some of them became activists, some became teachers, some simply lived on, passing on to their children the knowledge of the importance of not being silent where silence kills. Linny sometimes told the other girls about that day at the factory. Her voice was weak, quiet, but inside she heard a strength. We did it, because there were many of us, and we held on to each other. What remained of the factory? The Bryant and May buildings eventually became part of history, once a symbol of poison and darkness, later a symbol of struggle. Even as the walls began to crumble, when the windows grew dusty, when cobwebs covered the old beams, one thing in those walls never faded: the echo of small footsteps, the echo of laughter and pain, the echo of the names of the girls who once stood here. A city that was no longer blind. London remembered them. It remembered the glow of phosphorus, the cries for justice, the first women's strike in its history. And it wasn't just about a factory. It was about a shift in consciousness. After the Matchgirls strike, England began to reconsider working conditions, child labor, toxic materials, women's rights, the role of journalism. It all started with dozens of little girls who held boxes of matches in their hands every day, and one day decided to light not matches, but the truth. Sarah, a last look at the factory. On the last day of summer, Sarah stood outside the factory longer than usual. She listened to the sound of the wind between the pipes. She watched the sun set behind the roofs. She smelled the glue that had once seemed unbearable, but was now just the smell of the past. Linny approached her and said quietly, "We left something important here." Sarah nodded. "Yes, but we took the most important thing with us." They walked home slowly, unhurriedly, as if they didn't want to disturb this peace. Their steps were even, their breathing deep, and for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt not pain, not fear, but lightness, as if the body that had been carried by generations had been removed from her. A glow that never fades. Phosphorus only glows in the dark, and so did Matchgirls. Not all of their names are preserved. Not all of their faces are photographed. Not all of their voices are recorded. But their story is alive. It shines even today, a silent reminder that even in the darkest factories, a fire can be lit that will change the world. Final lines. And when night falls on the old Bow District, when the wind rushes through the empty shops, when the air is still, sometimes it seems like you can hear a soft rustle, the footsteps of little barefoot girls who no longer fear the dark, for they themselves have become the light. If you liked this story, subscribe to the channel, click like, and write any comment, even one word. YouTube will see your activity and show the video to even more people who love bedtime stories.